Hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. This episode is sponsored by Trekell Art Supplies. For over 30 years, Trekell has been obsessed with the art of brush making, and now they're applying that same obsession to professional-grade artist panels. Both their brushes and panels are made right here in California at their Hesperia factory. Go to Trekell.com and use promo code SAVVY16 to get 15% off your next order. Rey Bustos will describe himself as a husband, a father, an educator, and a sometimes artist. And I'm putting that in air quotes. If you were to ask his 9-year-old daughter what Rey does, she would simply say that he colors. I would describe him as a man who has found his life's work, dedicated himself to it, and absolutely excels at it. He is an expert draftsman. He knows his anatomy inside and out. Rey is also an absolute joy to talk to. His enthusiasm and gratitude for even the smallest moments of his life are boundless. Rey teaches anatomy at the Art Center College of Design, Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Art, and online at the CG Master Academy and New Masters Academy. In this episode, we talk about the frustrations of learning, of being an absolute beginner, whether it's in the context of learning a new language or learning how to draw. We also talk about another anatomy legend, Burne Hogarth, who both of us studied with, and what it was like for Rey when he was chosen to fill Hogarth's shoes as the anatomy instructor at the Art Center College of Design. Rey shares stories of his hero, his father, and how the gifts his father gave him continue to shape both his outlook and his work ethic. We also talk about how he overcame his fear of speaking publicly and why kindergartners are the scariest audience to speak in front of. So without further ado, here is Rey Bustos. Rey, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter podcast. I very much appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
I would love to hear a little bit about the beginning of your career as an artist. Can you give me a little backstory on how you started and when you decided that you were going to dedicate yourself to this vocation?
I hadn't thought about this throughout my life until one time it finally hit me when somebody asked me, what is it about drawing or what, pardon the pun, drew you to drawing? And that is, you may or may not know this, but I was born in Colombia, South America. And we came here when I was 6. Now, you have to remember, my siblings were teenagers, so they kind of understood the world a little bit better than a 6-year-old boy. So for them, they understood that there was an America, United States, that there's different languages, but I didn't. So now there was a point when all of a sudden I realized that when I lived in Colombia as a little boy that I had never really drawn. I played the usual little car games and things like that and kicking the ball around, but I don't remember at all ever drawing when I was in Colombia. But when we came here, one of the things that I did not understand is I did not understand why I couldn't understand anybody else because I had no concept of English, Spanish, or anything like that.
Right.
How could you know? So it was really weird and it was very scary. And for a while, actually, my parents were really concerned because I was having a lot of nightmares. And it was because of that misunderstanding, not understanding what the language thing was. And I had never gone to school before, and all of a sudden I was put in with all these other kids that were speaking this weird language. So one of the things I do remember was that whenever it would rain, we got to stay inside, so we didn't play outside. So we got to stay inside for lunch. And what that meant was we got to draw. And all of a sudden, I remember very clearly, even though I didn't understand, English, I did understand the human language, which was kids coming over, patting each other, and coming over to where I was drawing, and they were pointing.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that other kids couldn't draw. I didn't even know I could draw.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing something that felt comfortable, and it felt like it was the only time I felt equal to the other kids. And I didn't realize I had that ability. And from then on, I became the artist of the group, of the class.
Uh-huh.
And with every grade I moved up, I was the artist. And there's oftentimes another one, but it was always like, that was like my last name, like, Leonardo da Vinci and Ray the artist.
The artist.
Yeah. And I remember that there was another Ronaldo in the class. That's my full name. And he was, Ronaldo the criminal, and I was Ronaldo the artist. So I knew that there was like this differentiation. He was just a troubled kid. But I remember how interesting that was. And I do remember one time in particular, and it was raining so hard. We all stayed inside at recess time. And
where did you come into? Were you in California?
Los Angeles.
Okay.
Yes. And we landed in Los Angeles. I have not lived anywhere outside of this little ring, this like 5-mile ring. I really rooted here. I really love it here. So that's a good question. I didn't mention that, but yes, Los Angeles, where I live now. So in Los Angeles, it doesn't rain very often, but I remember it was pouring so hard. And the school I went to was this like inner city, Los Angeles, dreary. It looked like a penitentiary for little kids. There was no grass, and the blacktop was just being pelted by rain. But I remember thinking how happy I was. And I remember I had a seat next to the window, and I was looking out there in the tetherball courts. The balls were swinging around and the trees were swaying, and it was raining so hard, and I was drawing particularly well that day. And I remember almost tearing up. Now, you have to remember I was in second grade.
Right.
And I remember saying to myself, this is the happiest I've ever been in my life.
Oh.
And that's when I realized I want to do this the rest of my life. And anytime I've ever lived in a place, or now that I've bought my home, is I remember I always look to see where my studio is going to be and where the window's going to be. And anytime it rains, I get up from bed and I go to that window and I draw it. And it reminds me of that little boy that created this life for me. So that's how it started. And I never varied. I never wanted to do anything else except draw. My daughter's so cute. She tells people that I color for a living because, she likes it. She's 9 years old, so she colors. So it's kind of cute to know. It's like, Daddy, what's he do? He colors for a living. It's kind of cute.
That's fantastic. And it's accurate.
It's very accurate, Antrice, and it's very endearing, and it reminds me of how lucky we are as artists that we get to draw and paint and basically, color for a living. So then after that, it was just a trek of going through school and finding the right school. I finally, at the time I was married to my late wife, my first wife passed away. But at the time I was married at 21, so I was pretty young. I've always known what I wanted. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be married and be a husband. And so at 21, now I think of it as, oh my God, you're so young. My shoes are 21 years old, by the way. So I'm thinking I was so young to get married, but you know what? It was the right decision for me. I'm just a married kind of guy. And at that time, my wife, being a woman, she was a lot more grown up than I was. I was still kind of like a child. Only one of us could go to college at a time. So we put her through college. She got her master's degree in audiology, so she was a hearing specialist. And then when she graduated, she was able to put me into school. So I started at Art Center College of Design. And that was the beginning. It's been 31 years since I started that school as a student. I teach there now. And my life has just been so much richer because of that art school experience and then the career I had after that. Now as a teacher, I'm fully dedicated to education now and passing on that passion of knowledge and anatomy. I'm an anatomy guy.
So did you study with Burne Hogarth then?
Yeah, he was my anatomy teacher. It's funny where my students were asking me about him today.
He was mine too. I don't know if you know this, but I'm an Art Center grad as well.
I did not know that. How fabulous. So when were you there?
Let's see, I graduated in 94. So I was there and I was slow. I actually did take 4 years to get through there, which is slow for Art Center, right? At that time, at least, because they wanted you to go straight through. So 90 to 94.
Got it. And I was there 86 to 89. And it took me a little bit longer, not quite 4 years, but almost, because my wife was ill. And unfortunately, she died before I graduated.
Oh, my gosh.
But I do remember being in Burne Hogarth's class and saying to myself, I want to know what he knows. Now, I'm going to say something, and you have to remember, I'm a very grateful person. It's going to sound immodest, but I tell my students that they have a better anatomy teacher than I did. And the reason I say this is because as much as I like Burne Hogarth, sometimes we got the feeling that he didn't want to teach us as much as tell us what he knew. And there's a big difference. And I'm definitely a teacher. And I want my gauge to see how much I could get my students to know, not how much I could tell them about what I know.
Right.
So in that sense, to be fair, he got me that spark. And I gave myself this vow that I would not only learn anatomy and get better figure drawing, but I did vow to myself that one day I would teach his class and in that room. And I did. I took over that room after he passed away. They tried 2 or 3 different people. It didn't work out. And then when I hit, this is my 20th year of teaching his class.
Oh, wow.
But it's my class. I definitely made it my own and I love it.
Yeah. So having that comparison, I'm really curious, what would you say your biggest takeaway from studying with Burne Hogarth was? And then the second part to that question would be, now I'm sorry, I'm making the the assumption that everybody went to art center. So of course everybody knows who Burne Hogarth is.
Well, I think, there's 2 really well-known anatomy teachers, I think, in the United States that are both gone.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them is Robert Beverly Hale out in the East. And then out here, it was Burne Hogarth.
Mm-hmm. And Burne did the Tarzan series for a long time. And he's got, I don't know how many anatomy books out that you can find. So he was a major figure in figure drawing. So I'm kind of curious then, what was your biggest takeaway from studying with Burne? And then after you went on to take over that spot of teaching, what were some of the specific things that you did to make it your own? Because I think that's a really smart move and really important move that you made to make that distinction.
One of the major things, when I had his class, I didn't realize who he was. I thought his name was kind of funny. And in those days, you called him Mr. Hogarth. You didn't call him Burne or Bernie or anything like that. You know what I mean? I still remember at one point when I was young, I remember finding out about, let's say, Peter Paul Rubens.
Mm-hmm.
And look at these drawings. I was like, oh my God, how do you do that kind of a thing? And I guess it was Burne, in Burne's classes, when we realized it was the knowledge that all these artists shared about anatomy or perspective or all the basics of an art education that made them as good as they were. They all knew the language. And because I had to learn English, I oftentimes use this as the analogy is anatomy and figure drawing is a language. And people that don't know, they just think, well, you could draw, so it should be easy, right? It's like, well, it's not as easy as that. When you draw well, you're really very, very educated. And one of the things I got from being in Burne's class, like, wow, this guy knows a lot.
Yeah.
And if you ever listen to somebody talking about, I don't care if it's box making, it's like he's a box maker and he speaks with passion. You get involved. It's like, I want to make a box. You know what I mean?
Yes, it's contagious. And when they know something, especially like you and Burne did inside and out, I mean, Burne was able to, he could construct a figure from any angle. And I know you can too, but I mean, it was just as a student, an amazing thing to watch where he would just on the chalkboard draw a perfectly anatomically correct figure hanging upside down with the leg bent over and, all this stuff. But he and you know the muscles so well that you're able to construct anything out of any scenario.
Right. And that's the common denominator, isn't it? It's like once you know the language, then you create poetry.
Yes.
And I do remember being frustrated the first few years trying to learn English. It was just not coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
And can you imagine a kid frustrated? Now I understand when babies are crying.
Oh, yes.
They're actually trying to tell you what is wrong.
Yes.
It's like, and the mom is like, what do you want?
And the kid thinks they are saying it like, so I had sort of the opposite experience that you did, that in around 2010, I met my husband who's from Argentina, and I ended up moving to Argentina and not knowing, thinking that I knew Spanish well enough to communicate, but learning very quickly that I knew nothing. And so that I can absolutely understand, even as an adult. So as a 6-year-old, the frustration must have been exponential. But as an adult, I understand what's happening. But the frustration level at having to talk like a 2-year-old and not being able to say what you want to say and not being understood is exactly what you're saying.
Especially when you are an artist and you want to express and
Yeah.
you're dying to say this. And so I remember that feeling of, I know what I want to say. Why can't I say it? And being almost like you're making fists,
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of shaking, and it's not that far from being that baby. So I started feeling like that with figure drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh my God, why is this so? I was a renderer. Without knowing much anatomy, I could copy things. So my portfolio getting into art center looked like I was a photographer, but I wasn't. It was all very realistic cars and things like that. So I thought I was really good. And boy, was it humbling to be at art center. And all of a sudden you're sitting next to, for me, like Craig Mullins and just people that became like monumental figures. And they were just such great artists. It almost made me start thinking I shouldn't be in art. I should go become a bank teller. And it's very humbling to think it's like, oh, I thought I was good. And then you're sitting there with this blank piece of paper and this pencil and the model. And all of a sudden the model looks like a Sasquatch and nothing you are doing. And I'm listening to the lectures and taking notes. And then it's like, okay, I think I got it now. And then you sit and the model takes their pose and all of a sudden, you almost start crying.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do this. And it was so frustrating. It was like, it reminded me of what I went through before trying to learn English.
That's such a great analogy.
And it is a language and it's clumsy and you're almost like thinking so much, just like when you are speaking Spanish and you don't speak Spanish as well as you thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you were saying. You thought, and Argentinian Spanish is actually very beautiful, by the way.
It is,
Topped only by Colombia.
Of course.
And then your husband will say the opposite. But
he can't
anyway,
hear you. That's why you don't hear any screams. I have the headphones
really
on.
but it is a very pretty Spanish. But the point is that it is a very good analogy. And I tell people the same thing about, like, oftentimes in my classes, I ask if anybody knows how to play a guitar or the piano. And invariably, there's going to be one or two people that raise their hands. And I'll say, but remember how hard it was the first time. You may have an ear and have like an aptitude for an instrument, but you really need guidance and you need somebody to tell you, no matter how gifted you are. And as much as I thought I knew how to draw when I was in front of a model, that's why I took it upon myself to make it my life's work to try to get better at figure drawing. For no other reason. It wasn't to make more money. It was just like this personal thing, because you don't become a bit better figure drawer just so, you can make more money. You know what I mean? It's more about like, it's a personal thing.
Yes.
I tell my students, oh yeah, it's very much like figure drawing to me, because my work isn't even figurative. But when I teach the figure, I like to draw the figure. To me, it's kind of like people that love to go fishing. When they go, they don't care how many fish they catch. They're basically just going there because they love to fish. You know what I mean? It's a feeling.
And with art and what you're describing, it's a love of learning. It is a lifelong pursuit and mastery of it. I don't know. It's almost impossible in a sense, because
I think that's why we like it.
Yeah, the challenge of it. So I've gotten, a couple questions from artists who are like, oh my God, I don't know what, I can't draw the figure and I want to draw the figure and I'm so frustrated. And it is that frustration. Like, I feel it too still sometimes, where you know what you want to say, but you can't say it yet and you're still learning. So you must see that often with your students, because typically the analytical figure drawing is what, like third or fourth term do I remember that correctly?
It's third term, and boy, I'll tell you, I really get into it. It's very in depth. It's, I think, even more than when Burne was doing it. And that's saying a lot, because he really, we sat for hours listening to his lectures. But I do this. I used to marvel at how he could do that. How could he talk for so many hours? And then and then I wished and I dreamt for that job. And then after he passed away, guess what happened? They called me, and then I almost like passed out because like, why did I wish for this? Because I was petrified. It's like, I was kind of like, I didn't really want this job. I just wanted to say I really wanted this job
Right.
because now, and all of a sudden, I think they called me like in October, and I was to start in January.
Oh my gosh. So I just want to interject one quick thing for people who are listening and don't know Art Center or how the classes are. At least when Rey and I were there, I believe now they've changed, but this anatomy class, all your classes were 8 hours. You would get there at 8 o'clock in the morning and you would be drawing or painting until 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And you'd have a little lunch break in between, but one single class was 8 hours. So what Rey is describing is 8 hours
grueling.
About talking about anatomy and constructing figures, and then a bunch of about 20 or 30 students trying not to cry.
And what people might get a big kick out of is Burne Hogarth was not a young man.
No.
I mean, when you had him, he was in his 80s.
Yes.
And we were like in our 20s, and he would wear us out.
Yeah.
We would like on a break, and we couldn't complain because like, oh my God, we can't say anything in front of him because he's like 80. And, how could we say, oh my God, we're tired. Can we have a break?
Yeah, he's 80 and he was a force to be reckoned with. Like he was not that. Well, I lucked out a little bit in the sense that I did the work program. So I set up the model studios for the entire time I was at Art Center. So before I actually had him in a class, I had three terms of setting up his studio for the course. So I got to see him when he wasn't quote unquote performing. And so I happen to know that angry man, like military facade, there was a teddy bear underneath that.
Oh, yeah. And it's really funny because I know his daughter-in-law, who's married to Michael Hogarth. And I haven't met him yet, but we know of each other quite a bit because I have worked with the Animation Guild, which is what Pam Hogarth is involved with. So she has seen me firsthand and loves the way I teach because that is something that I kind of like drew from and use as my model. I can talk for now. I can see why he could do that for hours is because when you love something so deeply, and I do with the subject matter, it's something that keeps refueling me. And it's something that I could feel like 2 hours into a lecture, a lot of times I could feel like, I'm kicking into a different place here. And I get that second wind that reminds me when I used to run cross country and you'd be on the 5th mile and then something happens and then you just fly and something takes over your body. And I do the same. I've had 2 back surgeries, for God's sakes.
On those cement floors.
Oh my God, my students just cannot believe how I could just keep going. But they almost cheer me on. You could tell that they really enjoy it.
So within a typical class, there must be a certain percentage of students who are kind of like you, who are just obsessed with the anatomy and want to know, or like basically hanging on your every word. And then I'm curious, are there others who aren't quite that enthusiastic? And if so, how do you transfer your energy to them?
That's a great question. And I'm going to tell you something that you probably don't know, but it's kind of shocking, is they took that class off the required list. I know, isn't that something? I know. And
I'm not being sarcastic. Seriously.
If you guys don't understand why Aunt Teresa's fell out of her chair, it's because how could that class be, it's just an elective, you could take it if you want, as an illustrator or entertainment designer. So when they took it off, what happens now is, and this is the reason I'm answering in this way, is I get people that actually sign up for the class and I get full classes. So for the most part, they really do want to learn not just anatomy, but specifically anatomy from me. And I like that a lot. So yeah, every once in a while I get somebody that's a little less enthusiastic because they thought it was something else, or who knows what they would have thought.
It was easier.
But the way I do that is, I'm telling you, I just passion people to death. And I mean it. It's like, I think if anybody is in my room, they're going to feel it too. That's like, you gotta give the kid credit. He's working hard up there, and you have to at least put some energy into it. But for the most part, I get really great classes. And the good thing about starting to become a little bit better known, I'm never going to be a big star like Burne or anything like that. I'm primarily, a husband, a dad, and it's like, oh yeah, and I teach and I do a little art here and there. So my priorities are a little different. I don't need to be a star.
Yeah, but like, come on, Ray.
But it
And you
does
do,
help
and
that people know. Okay, yes, ma'am.
wait. I just have to call you out. Like, to say you do a little bit of art here and there, are you serious? I've seen your work.
I know you're very sweet in saying that. You, my wife, and my mom love everything about me. But it is something that I really do put so much effort into being the best teacher that I can, that everything else kind of gets pushed aside a little bit. And it's actually a good thing to kind of keep the ego in check. And the good thing about being in this particular realm of art making or teaching art is all I have to do, and I'm surrounded by beautiful books, and all I have to do is look at the work of J.C. Leyendecker or Dean Cornwell or Peter Paul Rubens, and it's like, oh my God, how can you have a big ego? So it's a very humbling thing. It's like being a musician and you play the piano and there's Franz Liszt and Chopin and all this stuff that came before you. It's kind of like, you know what, just be grateful that you do what you do. And I'm just very, very grateful that I get to do what I love to do, especially when you think about in the scheme of like a planet, is most people on this planet aren't doing something that they love. They're just surviving, or they're trying to get by, or they're trying to keep from being killed or whatever. Is that we forget that not everything is the United States or England or whatever. It's like there's a lot of stuff on it. So I'm always very good. I wake up grateful and I make it a point. It's my moral obligation to be grateful and to be happy. And because of that, even during hard times, I tend to be able to float above all that. But the thing about being a star, it's like, I know that Burne is look, a lot of times people are really impressed that he was my teacher, but I do tell my students, like I said, that's like, you have a pretty good anatomy teacher too. It's just, you know what I mean? And I care just as much and maybe even more. And the other thing that was an asset to me is I taught kids for a long time. And that really teaches you to be calm and to be patient. And even when I work with my daughter, sometimes it's like, wow, it's not easy. And you have to verbalize everything. You can't just say, well, draw a sphere. It's like you actually have to, if you ever think about this. Imagine if you have to write a paragraph on how to draw a sphere with a pencil. All of a sudden you realize, holy smokes, I need 2 or 3 sheets of paper. There's all sorts of like science behind it. It's like, wow, I thought I was just drawing a little ball.
Yeah, the curse of knowledge.
It's amazing. It's like, wow, it takes a lot. It's like trying to describe what it takes to walk without tripping. It's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was doing so much.
Right.
And you don't bump into people. You know what I mean? You're at a mall and somehow we all maneuver and not crash into each other and get head on collisions. Well, drawing is like the same thing. And all of a sudden you can't just tell a little kid to draw a chord and that chord is not right. You have to like do this, and you have to really explain everything. And it taught me to be a better teacher with the big kids.
What age range was that you were teaching when you're describing teaching these kids?
5 and up. And I did this concurrently with Art Center. I just finally stopped doing that this past year, 2016.
Wow.
I was private students.
What were you teaching them?
Anything art related, whatever the kid really was leaning toward, that would help them with. They wanted to paint, draw, whatever. But it was always like drawing first. I want to make sure they could draw. Because, that's a foundation for every art.
Yes.
It's like drawing. Drawing is, without an artist who can't draw, can't speak. So I knew it's like the one thing I wanted to make sure that each kid could do is at least put shapes together. They don't have to be good artists. It's kind of like taking piano lessons. You don't necessarily have to like think that the kid's going to be a pianist. What you need to do is give the kid like something so that they like to draw, and you never want to kill that spirit. So the last thing you want to do is become like Burne with them. You know what I mean? You have to be really gentle. You have to be a parent. And it also taught me to be a little bit more patient with the grown-ups, because a lot of times you just take it for granted that they know certain things, and they might not. And the other thing it taught me is to tell my students to be easier on themselves. I tell them to treat themselves like they are their own child. And this is good advice for everybody because all artists are hard on themselves.
We are.
But if you ever, and Teresa, do you have kids?
No.
You're going to be a great mom, I could just tell. But imagine yourself as a mom or as an auntie or helping a little kid.
Yeah.
Last thing you would do is like call them stupid. It's like, you can't do anything.
What?
But
you can't walk yet?
I know. Imagine how many times you say that to yourself, especially like at art center or whatever. God, I'm just not as good as these kids. I'm not what you don't realize is all the things that you are good at. And then later on, somebody will say, you were always so good at that. I go, you're kidding. You saw me that way. I heard like a podcast I know I mentioned this name before, Craig Mullins, but people Google him. This guy was just an amazing genius as a student. I mean, he was just blowing everybody away. And I happen to have almost every class with this guy. So it's like, oh my God, he's in this class. He's in every class I was in. It was like, watching Amadeus, and there's like, I'm Solieri. And it's like, oh my God, it's like, I thought I was good. And all of a sudden I'm sitting next to this guy that's so good. And then that's when just recently, there was somebody who said, Craig Mullins mentioned you in a podcast. I go, you're kidding. I didn't even think he knew who I was. And he said, if you really want to know anatomy, you look up Rey Bustos. I go, oh my goodness, he really thought of me as good at that. Because even as a student, I remember that everybody knew how much I loved that and how much I wanted to be better at that than anything else I was doing. And that's still with me. I'm still trying to get better. Because like you said, it's a neat thing to be an artist because there's never any end to it. You could have a life of books and you're learning from like this book. I love looking through my books and sometimes looking at pictures. And that's a neat thing. Sometimes I just want to look at the drawings. Sometimes sometimes it is interesting to read the text about an artist. I mean, because these people were real. Like, read about Pontormo, and he was kind of like what was the term where it's like you always think you're sick?
Oh, hypochondriac.
Yeah. I mean, he had all sorts of weird issues, and you think of these people, it's like, wow, they're so good. They must have had really great lives. A lot of them were just tortured. A lot of them were like, it's, the competition is too much, and it's like, wow, they're so good. They have books out. Yeah. They weren't out when they were artists.
Yeah.
You don't know what your place in history is until history happens.
Right.
So Pontormo would have been pleasantly surprised that, I know who he is and a lot of people know who he is because there's a lot of anonymous artists too that are very good.
Right.
It's a neat field we're in.
Oh, yeah, it is. And there's so many people out there doing such great work. So, yeah, it is. You do need to remain humble because there's always something that you can learn from everybody. This episode is sponsored by Trakell Art Supplies. Trakell has always made it a point to get to know the artists who use their brushes. So I wanted to talk to a few of those artists.
My name is Greg Crayola-Simpkins. I'm an artist. I've been working with Trakell for, it feels like 12 years. I forget the exact amount.
Trakell had gone out to see Greg at his studio to learn how he uses his brushes. They were doing a little research and development to kind of improve their line.
A lot of the brushes I was using, I would damage them pretty hard because, I worked pretty hard with the acrylics and then they wouldn't spring back fast. And I noticed that Trakell brushes, they held up longer and I was like, well, that's really cool.
They ended up developing a relationship and pretty soon
they're like, would you like your own set of brushes? I was like, oh my gosh, that'd be amazing. It's like a skateboarder getting his own skateboard, right?
I wanted to hear it straight from Greg, Trakell's first pro team member. And we'll talk about what that means in another episode. But what I wanted to know was what makes Trakell so different from other brands of brushes that he's used.
They held their point better. I don't know if it's because when I have gone up there and watched them make the brushes, it's all in house right there. You just see the care that they hand make each one. So you could just see that they put a lot of love into making their brushes, and it comes out when you're painting.
Go to Trakell.com and use promo code SAVVY16 to get 15% off your next order. I'm curious, was there a moment or a decision that you made in your career that you feel was a personal success for you?
Yes, and I'm going to have to keep going back to this time, but when my first wife was slipping away, I knew the doctor told me that she wasn't going to survive summer. So I took that summer off from Art Center. It was between my fourth and fifth terms. And for people that don't know what that means, there's 8 terms at Art Center. We count terms, not like semesters or first year, you know that. There's 8 terms. So it was in my halfway point.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that summer off to be with her, and we talked a lot. And one of the things that she made me promise was that I teach. She says, I know you want to be like a big star and want to be this great, well-known illustrator and all this, the stuff that you think about when you're young.
Yeah.
Like you want to be famous and a big star and all that. But I remember that I did promise her. I said, well, okay. And in the back of my mind, it's like, I don't know if I want to do that because, there's so many bigger things I want to do. But I kept that promise. And I remember any time I had the chance, I would sub for people at Art Center. I live close to Art Center. So I would tell people just, I could wake up and be ready and go take over your class if you wake up sick because I was a freelance illustrator. So that meant my time was my own. And after a few years, I started realizing that the teaching was taking over. I was little by little weaning off illustration. And all of a sudden I realized, wow, it's been a year since I've done an illustration job and I didn't miss it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, that's all I'm doing is teaching. I teach at Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Art. I teach at Art Center. And then I had this epiphany. I said, there is nothing bigger for me than teaching. And that was a really neat feeling. That I did become what I wanted to become. That I was a star in my own world. That nobody needed to know who I was except the students in front of me. And that's all that mattered. Even now, like when I say this, I almost tear up because it's such a powerful feeling to know that this is why I'm on the planet. And if I don't have any more art shows, if I don't do any more illustration work, it's okay. A lot of times I'm asked to speak to animators and directors like a feature animation at Disney. And I'm just like a little tiny part of like something bigger. And I come home and I have a sandwich, and I wait for my wife to get home and I go pick up my daughter. And those are like the things that make me happiest. That and going to class because it brings out the dad in me. I think before I had my daughter, I'm like 58. So think about like, my daughter being 9. So I'm like an old dad, and it's been it's like a rejuvenating thing to have a 9-year-old at this age. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And she just adores me. And I have like a really neat schedule so I could pick her up and I could be with her. And I color, Antrice, I color. So she can relate to that. And when I go speak to her class and draw and stuff like that, they can relate to that. It's like he draws.
Yeah, he's a drawer.
Interesting thing. Yeah, he likes to draw. I mean, really? That's what you do all day? It's like, yeah, I just, draw and color. It's very cute. So it's always like, you can imagine it's like, I do wake up very grateful because of the contrast between that and what my life might have been if we stayed in Colombia or if I was born in Libya or something like that. I'm glad that I live here.
Yeah. And it's so refreshing to hear you talk about that, to see your work through your daughter's eyes. And on top of that, you express that gratitude. I was having a kind of a similar conversation with another artist recently, but it was more along the lines of being an artist. Really, it is a luxury. It really is, because if you are in a situation where you have to fight to stay alive or, like there are plenty of people who live like that every single day or whose just mere survival is so all encompassing that the idea of, I would imagine that the idea of being an artist just cannot enter their heads.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is.
And even if you think about the fact that being 6, it was my parents that brunted that weight on their shoulders because they were 40. They were 40 years old in a land that wasn't theirs. And my dad went from wearing a shirt and tie to scrubbing pots and pans in a restaurant. So I am the beneficiary of my parents' labor. And they were, my dad ended up working in a factory until he retired. And he's still with us. He's 93 and my mom's 92. Wow. They worked really hard, but they worked very very hard jobs. I have a job I work hard at, but when I think about it, it's not, being on a factory line.
No, it's not physically.
And it's not 40 hours a week. Oh my God. So
Mm-hmm.
of course I'm grateful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love it. I'm curious, what would you tell sort of an artist who has, who doesn't have access to you? And, basically that means who doesn't live in the LA area, because you teach at so many places. And by the way, I'm sorry to go off on another tangent, but
oh, it's okay.
When I asked you to do this interview, you asked how I found you, I think, or something along the lines. And I was trying to remember, and it just feels like I've always known your name. I've always at Rey Bustos figure drawing. I've always known that. And it must be, I don't know if it's because, I worked for Disney for a long time and I used to go take classes at LAFA, so it's kind of like.
Oh, you were at LAFA too.
Yeah. So I would go,
It's funny we never met then.
Yeah. Any chance I get to take art classes, I'm always in, and so.
Well, I also teach online, so I have people all over the world. Tomorrow, I look at homework, and it's through CGMA.
CGMA?
It's Computer Graphics Masters Academy.
Okay.
And do you know Ron Lemen?
Ron Lemen. Oh my gosh, I know the name.
Yeah, because he also teaches at LAFA, and Lemen, instead of an O, it's an E. Fabulous artist. And the reason I'm bringing him up is that he was recorded teaching this class for CGMA, but he didn't want to, or he could no longer, whatever it was, he had me take over. So I teach his class, meaning people watch the same videos that have been out forever of him teaching. And he tells them what the homework is, but I'm the one who facilitates it. So I'm the one who looks at the work. I use my Cintiq and I draw over it. And then on Thursdays, it's a live Q&A. So if anybody wants to learn from me, I take his class, but then I expand on it.
Okay. So that was the question I was going to ask was, what references do you recommend to people who want to learn figure drawing? So actually, let's do it this way, since we know about that, and I will link to that in your...
And New Masters Academy.
Yes, with Steve Houston.
Yes, and Rey Bustos. Don't forget me. I'm the one who gets Steve his coffee. And I sweep. Being Hispanic, I do all the handiwork and I sweep and all that. So, I am also the gardener. At Art Center, one time I was mistaken for the leaf blower guy. Which I thought that's kind of funny. So, of course, I'm humble. When somebody thinks I'm the leaf blower guy, how could I think like I'm like a big shot, right? Like I'm Tom Cruise or something. It's like one time, because I get to school so early that one time I got out of my car and I start walking towards the entrance, at Art Center. And I saw like a Hispanic man next to a pickup truck. And apparently he was waiting for the new guy. It was a leaf blower guy. So he starts speaking to me in Spanish, like, hola, ¿cómo está? Good morning. How are you? And I start talking to him too. And then he says, well, the apparatus is over here in the truck. And that's when I realized, oh my God, he thinks I'm the new leaf blower guy. I should have asked how much it paid, because it might have been, better than the teaching, or kind of like moonlighted. It'd be kind of cute to see like Mr. Bustos, leaf
blowing leaves on the Art Center lawn.
Before class. Yeah, because it was really early. So I could have done it. So it was hilarious. Yeah, I get there my class starts at 8 and I'm always at 6:40. I'm a nut about time, 6:40 in the morning. I'm always the most prepared.
You're always there.
Yeah, and in 20 years, I've only missed one day.
Wow.
That's right. You heard it here first. And that's because I remember one time my dad really had a hard time with his factory job, meaning it was just hard work.
Yeah.
But he's the type, he's 93. So he's out of that generation with men just don't complain. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize how much he didn't like his job until after he retired.
Oh, what did he do in Colombia?
He worked for the telephone company and he was an executive. Like he had moved up, but to move here, he couldn't become an executive. You have to start at the bottom.
Right.
So I really cherish him. He's like my hero. And the neat thing is like ever since I was little, when, people would have like, Batman or whatever the superheroes were, it's like, it was always my dad. I always thought my dad is my hero, and he still is.
Aww.
So I kind of have that to have me kind of like just basically keep me humble and just remember how humble he was and is. But I do remember how hard it was for him to go to work and come back. And it was a really hard job. It was very, but I do remember one time he came home and he had a piece of paper and he set it down and he didn't mention it, but I looked at it and it was an award for being at work 10 years without missing a day.
Wow.
Now, can you imagine? This is a man who worked a hard job and he didn't miss. So that's where I got it. It's like, I have a really great job. There's no way I'm going to miss. And the only reason I miss is because I had back surgery. So I still hate saying that I missed one day out of 20 years.
Because you had one day because you had back surgery?
Yeah, yes.
I had back surgery as well, and I took way more than one day off, Ray.
It's also, entries, to be fair, I scheduled it in between semesters.
Okay.
You see what I mean? So it wasn't like one day I had surgery.
You weren't in the class on your gurney?
Yeah, exactly. No, but I was at LAFA. At LAFA, 1 week after my surgery, I didn't want to miss that day. So I was driven there and I was put on a leopard print couch. So I taught from my little leopard print couch. And I saw that picture somewhere. I was not going to miss a day. So it's hilarious. I'm just a nut.
You are. I love it.
How many people, my doctor cracks up and he says, oh my God, I've never met anybody. Can you imagine? You could actually get out of work for a month if you want to. I go, no way. You have to. It's like a pit stop. It's like, no, I want to be back on the track.
No, I'm trying to remember now how long I was out, but it was several months, I think. I think it was like 2, maybe 3 months that I was out.
Well, you know that back surgery, it's one of those things that's just a generic term for like, who knows what was done.
Whatever it could be. Yeah.
What was done with me. Because, and with each individual, it's different. You know, it's not like, a transmission. I mean, we're really delicate beings and we don't realize that until something goes wrong. And all of a sudden, and that's another thing to be grateful for, that, man, in this day and age, this guy really fixed my back. I mean, I have hardware in my back and I'm half bionic, but I am just so grateful. And then imagine me being able to see my x-rays and know what I'm looking at. I go, wow, that looks really weird to see the stuff from Home Depot in my body. You know what I mean?
I can't imagine the conversations you must have had with him. No, I'm sorry. Excuse me. It's this muscle right here.
Oh, yeah. You appreciate the fact that, whenever you have a back issue, it's going to manifest itself on your leg. So I knew something was going wrong when my gluteus medius wasn't firing and then my tibialis anterior wasn't firing. So I knew exactly what to tell him. So he knew exactly, what wires were being affected. If you think about it, you really have to be able to figure out what's wrong with you. So this way, it made it a little easier for him to assess where the damage was. Besides, having the MRIs and all that, he didn't just take my word for it and cut me open. But at least initially, it made it easier for him to.
He knew exactly where to
visualize.
Look.
And I knew, and that's what scared me. Is like I knew something was really wrong with my back by the way my legs were reacting, and I was falling down in the parking lot, kind of a thing, and not being able to get up. It was pretty scary.
Yeah.
So everything I tell you, whether it's my first wife's death or back surgery, it's all about, oh my God. But when you're well and you're doing what you love, it just feels like it's magnified.
Yeah. Yeah. So those setbacks sort of magnified the current gratitude, when things are going well, you feel it, you seem to feel it even more. It seems to be magnified.
Yeah, and of course, being a lucid thinking person, you realize what's going on in the world, and it just makes you even more grateful. So compound all that, it's really quite an experience being in my classroom because I talk about so many things, but I get around to what the lecture is that day. Like today was the back muscles, but I have to start drawing like animal stuff up there too, because I like the comparison between animal anatomy and human anatomy. So that's something I bring into the mix. Another thing I added was I teach a 3D anatomy class. So we build écorchés. And it can't all be done in one class. So a lot of times, I know at LAFA, the full-time students have to take me twice for 2D anatomy and 3D anatomy, just because it's one semester is not enough.
And écorchés are the physical sculptures of the anatomically. Wow. Yes.
Yes. Yes, and that's something we never had. But when
No.
I got the call, remember the one that got me scared?
Yeah.
Because, I dreamt about it. I really wanted it. Then they tell me I had it.
Be careful what you ask for.
Say, oh my God, I almost passed out. And I almost made myself physically ill. And, I'm a basically shy person. So all of a sudden, the one thing I used to almost have nightmares about was speaking in front of a class,
Yeah.
doing a report. And that's all I do now. So before that happened, before I actually started teaching, I remember that I was at a function where I clinked my little glass and made a toast. And all that was just to try to break that fear of speaking in front of people. And I started, at any wedding, even if I didn't know the person, I'm kidding, of course, but
did you just show up to random weddings so that you could practice?
yeah, just random weddings and do these long, elaborate toasts. And people are like, what's that? No, I would speak. And then people start asking me, can you speak at my wedding? Is it really funny? I go, oh my God, the thing I was most afraid of is the thing that I gravitated towards. And now it's not so scary. Even something like this, talking to you on Skype years ago would have just made me very frightened. And I would just say, I can't do it.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to live my life in fear. And I'm glad because I've talked to at Disney Feature Animation. I was speaking at the auditorium once where they had at least 100 people there. And I had the auditorium and I had the projection and everything. And it's like, wow, I'm doing it. And I'm not feeling like you get a little bit, of course, but it's not like you're petrified. It's like, this is really neat. I like this. And the thing that overrides all that is like, I have something to share. And I always think about that. And nobody ever boos you off the stage. People always appreciate that you're trying to give them something. And even if you weren't very good, people clap and they're generous and they're kind. The hardest group, though, is whenever I get a chance to speak to kindergartners. Now, that is a scary group. Oh my God, they'll make fart sounds. They'll do, they'll tell you that, they start like rolling their eyes. The good thing is, as an artist, we don't get that and they almost don't let me leave. But it is a frightening group because they'll raise their hand and ask what they want. And they'll ask if they could go to the bathroom. Or, I'll go, okay, I remember this very clearly as a kindergarten class here in South Pasadena. And finally I said, well, if anybody has any questions, so all these hands go up and I say, okay, what's your question? It's like, what's your favorite animal? So I thought that was kind of cute. So everything is like, I'm not
completely
sure
random. Yeah,
exactly. It's like, what's your favorite color? Do you have a cat? It's like, if your favorite animal is a cat, do you have a cat? What's its name? I have a cat too. And before you know, it's like, we're not talking about art. We're just talking about stuff.
But the interesting thing about that, here's my theory on it. Like, there's two things. One, I love that you took it upon yourself to practice and to get over the thing that you're most afraid of. I love that so much. The other thing about, so I don't teach kindergartners, so I might get a million emails from people who actually do teach kindergartners telling me that I'm wrong, which could be true. But the way I read that is they're kind of learning social skills. I think they just want to ask you a question. And so the first thing that pops, they want to interact.
They like you.
Yeah, they like you.
Or they would not ask you anything.
Right. So their questioning skills aren't really there yet. So they're just raise their hand, oh my gosh, he picked me. Do you like cats?
It's wonderful. And I always take it that way. I always understand exactly. I'm actually impressed that they raised their hands because I could never raise my hand as a 5 or 6 year old.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have.
I could never. I just wanted to be invisible.
Yeah.
My daughter's very good. She talks to adults very easily. I take her to crit sometimes when it's a final crit and she'll ask questions to the students, and she's tougher than I am. So I really admire that in her because I don't have that. So yes, if a kid asks me what my favorite animal is and I'll say a cat, I definitely respect that because you have to remember that that's a skill not all kids have. Not all kids want to raise their hand and ask a question to an adult, but it does mean that they do like you and they don't want you to leave and they don't know what to ask about art or how do you get into it or anything like that, but they want to ask you something to let you know that they care and that they appreciate that you're there. A lot of times they appreciate you just because, they don't have to take a test or, or open up a book. They just don't, it could be a film, it could be anything, whatever it is. You remember like when you're in school and they would bring the projector in and we got to see a movie? That was quite a treat. It's like, I don't care what it was, and there were like these, driving videos or something like that.
Right.
So I don't care what it is. I just, don't want to do the regular stuff. So in a sense, I tell all artists, and I tell even my students now, if you ever get a chance to go speak to younger people, do that, whether it's your high school, grade school, because it really, it reminds you of how much you do know. Because you're at Art Center and you feel like you don't know anything. And you look at it like, oh my God, until you're with kids and you're drawing things and they think it's like, you might as well be pulling like quarters out of their ear. They just can't believe it because it is magic.
Yeah.
And a blank piece of paper is just that. It's a curtain with nothing behind it. You pull those strings and all of a sudden there's something there. It's like, how did you do that? It was a blank canvas. Now look what you did with it. You see what I mean? And so I do tell all my students to just remember the magic of what you have in you, because that will encourage you those times that you feel like I'm not very good. It's like, no, you have a voice and you have something to say. And it's your obligation now to find that voice if it takes all your life. You don't always have to have the best voice, but just a voice. And because it's your voice, it's important. And I really have to teach that to myself.
Yeah.
Because so long I just felt like I didn't have a voice. This isn't my country. And now I'm an American citizen and I love the language and I love being able to talk and I love being able to be in front of a class. It's a privilege. And it always keeps me young because I'm always around 20-something-year-olds, and LAFA, and even LAFA where you have the 60-somethings that always wanted to take art classes. Now it's the same thing. It's like they're children all over again. So we're very lucky that we have that opportunity to keep that thing inside us young, and it feels good to share that. That's why I love being a teacher. Is I get to just do what I'm doing with you right now. We call it coffee talk just before I start my lecture for about half an hour. They don't realize, but I'm teaching them stuff. It's like, let's just chit chat for a little bit. And every morning for about half an hour, we just talk.
Yeah.
And I'm also talking about like art and anatomy, but I'm also just talking about being grateful and that it is your option, your choice to be happy or not. And, I'm my best. I don't drink or smoke or anything because I don't need to. It's like I keep that going within me. I can elevate my senses to a really high degree just by thinking about good things and the good things in my life, not the bad things, not what I don't have. Now I'm going on and on and on, just like my coffee talk in the morning. So
I am very purposely not interrupting you because I'm enjoying what you're saying so much.
Well, and the neat thing is for people that don't know, Antrice isn't my next door neighbor. We just met, and this is the way we've met. We've never seen each other. But one of the things that we talked about is like, Antrice, let's just talk. Let's just pretend we're having a cup of coffee and that everybody is there sitting with us. Whoever is listening to this will hopefully feel that too. That's just, we're just talking. We're two people and we're grateful. And we're artists. And that's one thing we all have in common is we're all brothers and sisters in this. I may be a little further down the line, but like I tell my students at art centers, whenever they're going to start, like they're going to be first term, next term, they always have this orientation where they get to talk to the students that are like third term or fifth term or eighth term. It's like, I'm 58th term. I mean, I've just been there a long time, but I'm the same person. I'm just like, I've been there 20 years teaching and then the few years that was there as a student. So this is my, if you count my student life, I started 31 years ago.
Wow.
So I was a student and I subbed whenever I could. And then I've been teaching for 20 years and I stopped doing all the other stuff, the illustration, because I really am dedicating the rest of my life to just education. And I love it. And I like that. And every once in a while, I probably will do a show here or there, a fine art show, or I don't think I'm going to illustrate ever again. It's just there's no desire any longer. Fine art, every once in a while I do like to paint and have a show. But yeah, this was all about just sharing with other artists and making sure that everybody feels uplifted about where they're at, because wherever you're at is the best place to be. You can't look, it's like, well, I don't have much experience, but you're gaining it. How do you think you get
every
it?
day? Every day.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. Every day just adds another day.
It's a privilege.
So, and that's what we added to everybody listening to this podcast, is just this conversation should make people feel a little bit better.
I hope so. Rey, thank you so much for sharing yourself and sharing. It is so uplifting, sharing your gratitude and sharing just your joy. I loved it.
And thank you. And thank you for finding me and asking me to do this. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
I hope you are feeling uplifted and that this interview with Rey brightened your day. To see example of Rey's drawings and paintings, go to savvypainter.com and click on the podcast link. You'll also find links to all of the artists and the resources that we talked about there. Once again, I'd like to thank Rey for sharing his story, and also to his wife Fiona for her work behind the scenes. She made sure that all of the technical issues were resolved so that Rey and I could have this conversation. So thank you so much, Fiona. I also want to give a shout out to some of the listeners who have helped made these podcast episodes possible. Winslow Art Center, Carolyn Green, Sylvia Bailey, Karen O'Connell, Alchemy Works, Kathy Naus, Jeanette Gray, Patricia Matranga, Deb Cook-Shapiro, Denise Klitzy, Christine Rasmussen, Greg Decker, Barbara Chantre, Nooner Media, Kathy Beeler, Amy Fitzgerald, Gail Height, Art of Joy, Barry Koplowitz, Abby McGray, and Trakel Art Supplies. Thank you so much for your support in making this podcast. One more thing I want to let you know. This year, you can expect a lot more workshops from Savvy Painter. If you are an artist who struggles with getting painting time in, or feels like you're always busy but never really moving forward with your art, then my workshops just might interest you. Past workshops include Mindset Mastery, a 5-week online workshop to help you get past the roadblocks that keep you from painting. In it, we tackle the inner critic, fears of artists, and setting yourself up for a successful creative day. The workshop, How to Develop a Relationship with the Right Gallery, helped several artists find the right gallery and show their work. So if this is something that interests you, you can go to savvypainter.com/workshop and get on the email list. This is separate from the main list that tells you when a new episode comes out. This is just for the workshop, so you don't get quite as many emails, but when you do, there's always something really good happening. Sign up now and get a downloadable PDF with case studies that tell you exactly how 3 artists pushed through barriers that were getting in the way of their studio time. You can, for example, learn how Rhonda went from not wanting to call herself an artist to getting her very first solo show. Also, listen to an introverted artist describe how she built her confidence and then spoke in front of an audience of her peers. And you can discover the tools that Samantha used to take back her power after a decade of believing that she had no, I'm putting air quotes there, she had no talent. So again, go to savvypainter.com/workshop to reserve your place on the list. When you sign up, you get that downloadable case studies that I mentioned, but more importantly, you get exclusive invites to upcoming workshops. Most of the time when I launch a new program, it sells out before I ever announce it publicly. So reserve your spot now at savvypainter.com/workshop. Until next week, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.